Hello, everybody. A very good evening to you, ladies and gentlemen. I warmly welcome all of you to the 18th webinar organized by the Bar Association of Sri Lanka. The Bar Association of Sri Lanka has been consecutively conducting these series of webinars on various topics over the past 4-5 months, and they have been able to contribute immensely, not only to just legal practitioners, but also to non-lawyers and students. The beauty of this production is that literally anyone can join this web series from any part of the island as well as overseas just by a click of a button. Plus, it is available on several social media platforms for viewing at any time. So today too, we bring to you a very interesting topic, though not commonly discussed. This is a very interesting topic, which is the law on sports or sports law, an area which needs continuous development over time. I will not speak further on sports law as we have a fabulous panel of experts who are well versed and qualified in that field. So let me take this opportunity to introduce to you the esteemed panelists of this evening. I'm pleased to have with us Mr. Navin Marapana, President's Counsel. Mr. Navin Marapana has over 21 years of experience in litigation and from the inception of his career handled multiple sports law as well as anti-doping law related cases. He conducts inquiries and arbitrations both locally and abroad, including at the Court of Arbitration for Sports in Switzerland. He has worked closely with the governing bodies of multiple sports in the country in a consultative capacity and represented Sri Lanka in international sports federations and governing bodies. We also have with us Mr. Sumathi Dharmawardana, President's Counsel, Additional Solicitor General. He joined the Attorney General's Department in the year 1994 and has served in the department for 25 years. He studied sports arbitration in Malaysia and was appointed to the panel of arbitrators in the Shenzhen Court of International Arbitration of China. Mr. Dharmawardana is a supervisor of telecommunication law, information technology, and sports law at the Attorney General's Department. He is also a member of the Appeal Board of the Sri Lanka Anti-Doping Agency. In addition, he advises the Ministry of Sports with regard to legal matters, including drafting new sports legislation, and contributed in drafting the Prevention of Offences Relating to Sports Act in Sri Lanka. I also take pleasure in introducing to you Mr. Panduka Kirtinanda, who has acquired commendable experience in both criminal and civil law matters for the last 26 years. He has served as a legal consultant to the Ministry of Sports. During his tenure at the Ministry of Sports, he has actively contributed to drafting and implementing multiple sports laws. He has also served as a panel member for sports arbitration and represented the Ministry of Sports as a member of the delegation in the International Olympic Council in 2013. He holds a Results Management Training Course Diploma by the World Anti-Doping Agency UNESCO Paris. He has also served as the chairman of the Sugatadasa National Sports Complex Authority, a board member of the Sri Lanka Anti-Doping Authority, and a legal consultant to the Ministry of Telecommunication, Foreign Employment and Sports from January 2019, and is currently serving as a member of the National Sports Council. I would also like to welcome and introduce to you Ms. Thiyumi Abesingha, an attorney at law by profession who is attached to Haley's PLC with an MBA and a bachelor's degree, double majoring in economics and business administration from the University of Illinois. Ms. Abesingha is one of the youngest women's national tennis champions in Sri Lanka, who has also represented Sri Lanka at many international events. Recently, Ms. Thiyumi Abesingha was appointed as the Secretary of the National Sports Council 2020 and has also served as a member of the Council on previous occasions. And those will be your panelists for today. We now move on to the moderator of the day, that is Mr. Shanaka Amarasinghe, attorney at law. Mr. Shanaka Singha has 18 years of experience at the bar and holds an LLB from the University of London as well as an LLM from King's College London. He functions as a counsel for Julius and Creasy since 2006. He's also a sports journalist and hosted Sri Lanka's only sports talk show, The Score, on Yes FM from 2003 to 2019. He is a multi-sport commentator and has contributed to local and international sports publications. So once again, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all our esteemed panelists and the members of the audience who are joining this webinar on sports law. Without further ado, we move on with the sessions. I leave you in the capable hands of Mr. Shanaka Singha, the moderator of the day. I hope you all have an interesting and an informative one. Over to you, Shanaka.
Thanks very much, Umayagi. Thanks very much for those introductions as well. I don't think I need to say much more about our panelists. If the panelists can unmute themselves as and when I refer to them, that would be great. So as Umayagi was explaining, this is going to be a panel discussion on sports law. And sports law is a wide subject. It's a generic subject, and there are several sets of disciplines under it, things like anti-corruption, anti-doping, regulation, all that sort of thing, which we tend to generally clump together as sports law. So there's a lot going on in this subject, and we will aim to try and deal with as many of those subsets of law as we can through this panel, which has a varied set of experiences in that regard. So we will be covering a wide variety, and we will be doing that across the scope of that next 45 minutes or so, after which the last half an hour will be open to questions from the attendees as well. So please type your questions up in the question and answer panel, and we will be happy to put those to the panelists at the end of the session, towards the end of the session as well. So at the moment, we are going to be discussing something that's quite topical. It cropped up just a little bit before the parliamentary elections. There was an issue with regard to match fixing allegations, which came in the front and back pages of the newspapers, and that caused a bit of a brouhaha, not just in the legal circles, but also in the public sentiment. So that was something that was not addressed previously. There was plenty of allegations, lots of people coming up with little sound bites, news columns, which might have suggested impropriety. But there was nothing really in the law to help us tackle that. But that has since changed with the Act number 24 of 2019, which Mr. Dharmawardena, President's Counsel, and Additional Solicitor General was instrumental in drafting. So if I could ask Mr. Dharmawardena first to go ahead and tell us exactly what those allegations were, how they cropped up, and what the Sri Lankan legal system can now, with the new teeth provided to it by this law, do about allegations and offences that are committed in that realm.
Thank you, Shanaka. I trust you can hear me?
Yes.
Fine. Shanaka, before we go into the recent issues of allegations with regard to the 2011 World Cup matter, I would like to take you all through why we had to bring in a special legislation and especially to criminalize match fixing. Prevention of corruption in sports was a much discussed topic, not even in Sri Lanka, but all around the globe. And number of governments, international agencies such as International Olympic Committee, International Cricket Council, and especially the United Nations agency, UNODC, United Nations Office on Drugs and Crimes, were very much concerned during the last 2 to 3 decades about preventing corruption in sports. And after 2015, the International Cricket Council had a number of discussions with the Ministry of Sports, Sri Lanka, with regard to criminalizing match fixing. We have my good friend, Mr. Panduka Kirthinanda, in this panel discussion. He too was instrumental in doing the first draft in 2013, and thereafter we started developing the draft, which was submitted to the legal draftman. And we had I represented the Honorable Attorney General in this exercise. And the ICC, they made arrangements for me to have discussions with the UK Crown prosecutors who prosecuted the last successful prosecution in UK, Nasir Jamshed and the case, and then which they made use of the UK Bribery Act. Along with that, we made number of changes to the draft we had, and we were able to bring in the Act number 24 of 2019. Even though we have mainly focused about the issues of match fixing in cricket, but the match fixing is, it has a cover, the law has covered all the sports. Before we go into the match fixing law in Sri Lanka, as I told you, I like to draw the attention of the listeners to the role of the United Nations agency, UNODC. The United Nations passed 2 resolutions, resolution number 8/4 on safeguarding sport from corruption in 20th December 2019, and resolution 7/8 in November 2017, which requested and make it necessary for the member states to bring in legislation and to criminalize offenses with regard to match fixing. The global campaign, Clean Sports campaign, had taken into such an extent all the news agencies in the world started giving and highlighting the match fixing issues all around the world. The Al Jazeera news report once stated, all global sport, including cricket, are under attack from organized crime. These criminal syndicates allowed the previously freelance corruptors of sports competitions and coordinate massive global fraud on sports betting. All global sport, including cricket, are under attack from organized crime. So the Sri Lankan government had to fight against organized crime and to prevent match fixing, and for everybody to see a good game of cricket or a good game of any other rugby or football. That is the reason why we had to bring in the new match fixing law. When it comes to the UK, I would like to take you all through the 2 reported cases in the United Kingdom. The first one was in 2010, where the Pakistan cricketers were involved in match fixing in Lords. The undercover reporters from News of the World in UK exposed 3 Pakistan cricketers for fixing the cricket matches at Lords. Then the UK Crown prosecutors had to rely on a very old act, the Prevention of Corruption Act in 1906. It's a real beautiful piece of legislation which was able to cover this event, rather the issue, and they framed charges under the 1906 Act. And the matter was taken up on appeal in the UK Court of Appeal. And the Court of Appeal in UK, which was chaired by the Lord Chief Justice, and they upheld that these actions of these cricketers fell fairly and squarely within the ambit of the 1906 Act. And the conspiracy count involving Majid and the count against Westfield were clearly established. There's a decided authority called Majid versus Westfield. And thereafter, when it came to the Nasir Jamshed case, which involved again Pakistan cricketers with regard to the T20 series in Dubai, they had to rely on the 2010 UK Bribery Act, which we also considered some of the provisions in enacting our act with regard to match fixing. Now let's consider, based on this, and in addition, we don't have much time. If not, I would like to take you all through the Azharuddin's case in India. However, let's look at the Sri Lankan law. The new law had created 2 groups of persons. One group is any person, and second group is any person connected to a sport. That is mainly to cover the people who are outside the sports arena, who are involved with match fixing, and as I told you, who are the part and parcel of the organized crime syndicates. Then what are the offenses? The offenses are set out in section 5. It says any person or any person connected to sports who solicits or accepts or agrees to accept or offers money or any other reward or benefit, and B, controls any other person or thing for such person's own advantage or to the advantage of another dishonestly or fraudulently. And then it goes on to say, to influence the result, the progress, conduct, or any other aspect of sport or sporting event commits the offense of corruption in sports. We have, I think, considered the UK legislation, and we have brought a very wide offense created under Section 5. Then we are defining improper performance in Section 6. Any person or person connected to a sport who influences improperly, unfairly, or dishonestly the results, progress, conduct of any other aspect of any sport or sporting event commits the offense of illegal manipulation in sports. So it is the manipulation in sports which creates the offense. And we have addressed the betting and gaming in the Act. Under Section 7, it says any person or any person connected to a sport who possesses information in connection with any sport or sporting event, knowing such information to be inside information or information on illegal corrupt conduct, bets on that sport or sporting event or encourage any other person to bet, will commit an offense. Then there's a requirement under the Act to disclose information. If any person or any person connected to a sport who comes to know that a betting operation is going on using inside information, and if they fail to disclose that information, that itself will commit, person will commit an offense. Now, one of the key features is this particular statute has given power for the Special Investigation Unit on par with the powers of the Bribery Commission to investigate into any allegation. And the Act has created certain mechanism to safeguard the independence and impartiality of the Special Investigation Unit, even though they are appointed by the Minister on a recommendation by the IGP, they have to report to the Attorney General. It is the Attorney General who will take the decision whether to file indictment or charges or not. So therefore, the Special Investigation Unit is reporting to the Attorney General. And the controversial issue, what you mentioned at the beginning with regard to the 2011 match fixing matter, even though the Special Investigation Unit has submitted an interim report, the Honorable Attorney General is still considering that matter, and therefore I do not wish to speak beyond that, since the matter is still under investigation and the case is not closed. Let's come to the other salient feature, that is the declaration of assets. The Prevention of Offences Relating to Sports Act number 24 of 2019 is the second statute in Sri Lanka which has made it mandatory for a person under investigation to submit his asset declaration. Therefore, Shanaka, I would like to caution all the people who are connected to the sports, and especially the sportsmen, should keep a track of their assets, and they will, once they are called upon to disclose how you got the movable and immovable properties, which is in your name and which is in your spouse's name and in your children's name, you need to disclose it, and failure to disclose will create an offense. And in addition to that, if a person fails to submit a proper asset declaration, on that itself we can charge. Before I conclude, I would like to tell you the new statute provides cooperation among the other statutory agencies such as the police and the CIABOC, the Bribery Commission, and with the international agencies. I trust within the given time I was able to cover the salient features. And in addition to that, Section 13, making a false allegation is also an offense, that is to maintain the integrity of people who are making complaints and to safeguard the sportsman. Thank you, Shanaka.
Thanks very much, Mr. Dharmavardhana. That was a very succinct encapsulation of what the new act entails and what responsibilities it puts on sportsmen as well as administrators and even people who are just satellite around the sports. Even fans sometimes might be caught up in this sort of thing if they're not careful, hanging around hotel lobbies trying to get autographs, that kind of thing. That whole situation might change a little bit given that the power of this act is quite far-reaching. So thank you very much for that. We'll come back to a lot more practical issues with regard to the implementation of that act once we have a chat with Mr. Kirthinanda as well. Mr. Kirthinanda, you've been involved in the drafting of the national sports policy, something that has been in its embryonic stage since 2012 and finally saw the light of day quite recently. You were also the advisor to many ministers previously, and you have a wealth of experience in how this national sports policy has evolved over the course of time. So can you tell us a little bit more about what the national sports policy is and how it is aimed to be given force to, how it's going to be implemented in the upcoming months and years, perhaps? Mr. Kirthinanda, I'm going to have to ask you to unmute your microphone. You can just click on the unmute. Yes. I think you re-clicked the mute button, Mr. Kirthinanda. One more time.
Okay, is it? Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for giving this opportunity to me. I would like to thank the panel as well as the moderator, Shanaka. First of all, I would like to say national sports policy. When we think of the national sports policy, I would like to give a background to this. In 1948, Sri Lanka became independent. Same year, Duncan White won the silver medal in London Olympics. That was a major goal in Sri Lanka, then Ceylon. Thereafter, we know that Susantika Jayasinghe won the 2000 Sydney Olympics silver medal. Also in 1996, we won the World Cup, and there are so many other achievements in sports. That is a bit of the history achievements we got in sports in Sri Lanka. I would like to draw everyone's attention. The sports law was implemented in 1973. Then the minister was Honorable K.P. Ratnayaka. The reason was in 1971, after the insurgency, they wanted to to develop the sport for the younger generation and to give more sporting events. And they appointed a committee. They call it the Gunawardhan and Heinz committee. Luckily, I have a copy of that. I would like to see. This is only a photocopy which I got it from archives. It clearly says how the act was implemented in 1973. Thereafter, we had the regulations drafted, first regulation drafted in 1974. So that's how the sports law evolved up to today's this thing. In 2012, the Ministry of Sports decided after 63 years to implement the national sports policy. We never had a policy. There were so many policies, but it was not properly drafted and implemented. So the minister, honorable minister, and the ministry decided to appoint a committee. I was lucky to be one of the members. Actually, I was not the only person who drafted it. All eminent sports personalities and government sector, private sector, sports administrators all supported it, and my contribution was very minimal, but I did my best. According to the national sports policy was implemented and it was gazetted and it was passed in Parliament in 2012. That was in May 15th, 2012. The gazette number is 1758/23. According to the gazette, we have a national policy has a vision, the Sri Lanka to be the strongest Asian country in sports. The mission is to be the nation of champions in sports in healthy, disciplined, unified, and prosperous society. There are so many goals actually in sports. If you categorize, there are about 40 to 50 areas that I could explain, but I have no time to explain the entire cassette and the policy. So therefore, I have just taken few of the main policies. One is the one of the best main policies should be the Sri Lanka should be a culture, a society with make sports in a higher manner. That means the sports culture. Culture, under the culture, you could bring sports tourism and also sports economy. So that is one area that they have implemented according to the sports national sports policy. And also they have introduced important areas like priority for good health, sports for recreation, sports for peace and development, identification for talented sportsmen, for school sports, and so on and so forth. And in this policy, we have specifically mentioned the sports has to be free and fair and also free from corruption. So in this main sports, we could see doping culture in sports and also in corruption culture. It was implemented in 2012 that we wanted to bring two legislations. One was Convention Against Doping in Sports, Act number 33 of 2013. That was also part of the policy we implemented during 2012. Thereafter, as my dear friend Mr. Damodana said, the Corruption in Sports Act was passed in 2019. And also we have mentioned in the national policy about the sports arbitration and also to bring a new sports act for the Sri Lanka. And also we have highlighted the cultural values of the sports and also the local sports in the country, and also to have a sports hub in the Asian region. And also we have mentioned specifically Code of Ethics in Sports, National Sports Information Center and also a museum. So we have basically covered this in 46 paragraphs, 45 paragraphs, and this is a whichever the government comes have to implement this, because this is being passed unanimously in the parliament, and there is no political agenda, or this has been creatively done to uplift the sports in the country. So one of the areas that I would like to discuss is Convention Against Doping in Sports. That is the Act number 33 of 2013. I could remember in 2010, there was an incident which I don't want to mention the name. We won the boxing Commonwealth game gold medal. Unfortunately, that boxer has to undergo a doping issue, and his medal was taken off. It was a very unfortunate incident. I could remember there was a provisional suspension at that time, and subsequently he came with the story that a doctor, actually a doctor who is not an MBBS doctor, has given certain medication. Due to this reason, he was positive for nandrolene. So therefore, the ministry decided how to overcome this kind of situation. I know we all know that WADA was introduced in 2003 and 4. It was the first WADA code. The World Anti-Doping Code was first introduced to the world in 2009, Thereafter, the convention was adopted in Sri Lanka. The convention was adopted in 2005, and Sri Lanka became a member in the UNESCO in 2011, month of May. Thereafter, the act was passed in 2013. In this act, it's clearly mentioned what are the offences in the section 3. Any person who is involved with the sports bodies or and also applies a prohibited substance will be punished under this particular act. The High Court will be if a person is guilty of an offence under this subsection 1, after conviction in a High Court indictment, the punishment will be imprisonment of not exceeding 2 years, and also liable for fine not less than rupees 500,000 and not more than rupees 1 million. And also the Convention Against Doping in Sports, Act number 33 of 2013, we have implemented the establishment of Sri Lanka Anti-Doping Agency. According to the agency, there's a chairman and the board of directors, and also director general, DG. The main powers and duties of this function of this agency is to plan, coordinate, implement, and monitor anti-doping activities in the country. And also we are with the World Anti-Doping Code, and also prohibited substance is gazetted annually. And for the last so many years, Sri Lanka has gone up in a highest level in against the anti-doping, against the doping in sport, and we are one of the pioneers in the Asian region that we have controlled the doping in sports in the country, as well as the duties of the main board is to see that the measures against anti-doping rules violation should be taken out from totally. So it is a great achievement that within a few years' time, Ministry of Sports and Attorney General's Department, Legal Draftment Department, and the eminent people who are involved in the sports supported to bring this act. And also, as Mr. Dharmawardana said, corruption in sports law was implemented, and we have the sports policy. The next step should be to implement the sports law. We have an old act that is 25 of 1973, and there are 3 amendments. But according to the new law in the international arena, we have to amend this. So either we have to do certain amendments, or we have to bring a new act in Parliament. So that is my personal opinion. I think the Ministry of Sports also trying to implement that. We have done the draft. I think the Honorable President Minister is very keen to bring new laws to the country. I would like to finally mention that sports tourism, the sports economy, and also sports culture could bring a lot of international foreign income to the country, foreign revenues. And also there's an area that I would like to mention, that there is a special area called Esports, electronic sports. That is a new area that we have to study. Electronic sports is also getting very popular among the younger generation, and we need to bring new regulations for that, because as we all know, there are gaming and betting in the esports. So there could be a lot of corruptions if you implement the esports in the country. Therefore, we have to carefully handle this area, because at the moment, Ministry of sports has 70 affiliated bodies, sports bodies. So esports is also one of the sports which has been implemented under the sports law. So that area should be carefully handled, and we need to study that area before it comes to the national level and the international level. But in the internationally, esports is already implemented. We all know that Japan has banned the esports in betting. They have only allowed horse racing and motor racing in gambling. So gambling, betting is given in certain countries. In our country, illegally betting is prohibited, but the betting is there. Even in the country, there are betting centers. There are many betting centers which are betting courts, especially horse racing and so on and so forth. So esports, if they bring the esports to the country, we need to put certain regulations, and also I think Mr. Dharmodhana will explain that in very brief manner, how to make sure that the sport is free from corruption. So these are the areas that I would like to discuss. We will have another session to discuss about the question and answers. Over to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Mr. Kirthinanda, and that's a very heartening presentation you make, because in this country there's quite a few criticisms leveled at several governments, saying that there's no policy with regard to things, important things like education, with regard to transport, with regard to power generation. But it appears from what you say that there is a very comprehensive sports policy in place, and it's just the implementation of that policy that the new minister perhaps has an opportunity to take forward. So that's very interesting. And Mr. Dharmavardhana and Mr. Kirthinanda have both told us that two of the pressing issues in global sports, that is, one is anti-corruption, which is match fixing, bribery, that kind of thing, and also doping, which is a huge problem in global sports, not just in Sri Lanka, have both been tackled by local legislation. So that is a huge step in the right direction in Sri Lanka's legal framework. But of course, legal frameworks are one thing, implementation, policy, and actual execution of these legal provisions are one thing, another thing altogether. So as Mr. Kirthinanda pointed out, Sri Lanka's sports law, the overarching sports law, the mother of all legislation in Sri Lanka with regard to sports, is Act number 25 of 1973. It came about, again, as Mr. Kirthinanda said, out of a situation where there was a lot of youth unrest, and the government of the day perhaps needed to channel the youth in a more productive direction. But since then, professionalism has come into sports. In the last 20, 25 years, we've seen professionalism in sport leading to things like the IPL, which are multi-billion dollar industries, not just multi-billion rupee industries, multi-billion dollar industries, and huge money being made in sports, and sportsmen are some of the richest men and women in the world, not just here in Sri Lanka. So is this act enough now for us to combat all the issues that come around with that professionalization of sport? And are there steps being taken to modernize that act? And what are those steps being taken? And how do we also maintain the non-professional sports arenas? How do we make sure that the government has some say as to who represents Sri Lanka, who gets to wear the treasured lion flag on his or her lapel? Those are some of the areas, Mr. Manapana, that I would like to put to you when going forward. If there are amendments being discussed, how do we marry these particular issues?
Hello, everybody. Yes, Shanaka, we live in exciting times. In the next few months, there will be radical changes in the sporting legislation landscape in Sri Lanka. And I think most of the pressing issues will be addressed, dealt with in the manner that will bring Sri Lanka up to international standards. I would like to just touch on two areas. As you said, the sports law is something, it's a creature of the 70s, bit like the Cold War. And it was enacted at a time when there was very little private sector involvement in sport in Sri Lanka. Worldwide there was, but in Sri Lanka, the only involvement, if at all, would be by way of a donation, where they would, a company or an individual would donate for someone to go abroad for an event or something like that. But in the last 10 to 15 years, even in Sri Lanka, there has been a huge involvement in the private sector with regard to sponsorship, and it's not become a one-way street, it is now a two-way street, where corporates and will wish to invest in sports expecting a return. Now, the present legislative framework does not create an interface for that to happen properly. Now, for example, national associations are generally unincorporated. Every 2 years or 4 years, they see a change of regime. Different people with different views come. So if a company wants to enter into a long-term partnership, which is beneficial to both parties, I mean, to reap commercial benefits from sport, the partnership can't be short-term. It is not like you sponsor an event. For example, say the Brazilian football, Nike has a relationship with them going about 10, 15 years. So the new act needs to create that interface so that corporates can contract with national associations and be happy and be satisfied that they can get the returns, because the companies will start paying money into the sport, but they get their returns in 5, 6, 7 years time. So if there is a regime change in association and somebody comes and terminates a contract, you will drive away people from sport. And this has happened in Sri Lanka. I mean, I won't mention the sports body. There's a very wealthy sports body that has had litigation relating to contract terminations running into millions of dollars, which makes, we've never had a Nike or a Adidas coming to sponsor one of our associations. Why is that? We don't have Rolex sponsoring them. So the new act has to create a methodology where the investors in sport are protected and the investment is protected from the frequent regime changes in a sporting body. So that is the first point I wish to make. And I think the new act and the new regulations will address that very important issue. The second point I wish to address is, as you said, there is a balance of power now between the ministry and the associations. The associations are private associations made up of the stakeholders of a sport, and the level of regulation, or I should dare say interference by the ministry into that, is a moot point worldwide. Now in Sri Lanka, we have seen the sports law abused to an extent that there is ministry interference into sports bodies, which interfere with that body's democratic processes. That is the abuse of Section 33 of the sports law. It's this thing called an interim committee. And we have seen now, for example, Sri Lanka cricket, from 99 to now, there have been about 7 interim committees. Now, I am all for the Ministry of Sports regulating sports bodies, because as you said, the ministry is spending 7 billion rupees a year on these bodies. So it has to be regulated. If somebody misuses it, they must be punished. But the new act should cater to a method to punish these people or punish the office bearers without interfering with the democratic process. Punishment is not by removing them and putting a ministry-appointed team who are not answerable to anybody, who can spend that $7 billion without answering to the stakeholders. So that has to stop. And if it doesn't stop, I don't think sport in Sri Lanka can go to the next level. Because if you look at each time, for example, Sri Lanka cricket has been having an interim committee, the accusation level in the Gazette is there has been financial mismanagement since 99. But not once has a single police complaint been made about these people. Nobody has been found guilty. No action is taken thereafter. And in a few years' time, again, that Gazette is revoked and a new body comes in. So this has to stop. I mean, it's a bit like Iraq being invaded, looking for weapons of mass destruction, which are yet to be found. So the coming law will address this issue and develop a regulatory framework where there will be supervision, which there has to be, but that will be done in a manner that will not interfere with the democratic electoral process of the association. So for example, if a committee has been mismanaging funds, you should be able to sanction the individuals and then call upon the association to have a fresh election or interim election to appoint somebody to manage its affairs. So that is quite different to the minister of the day deciding, putting his golf buddy or somebody else to run the affairs of that association. But with the vision of the current regime and the current minister, I think all these issues will be addressed, and they will be addressed soon. And I'm sure Thiumi knows what's in the pipeline. And I think with the current sports council, made up of a lot of very high profile sports personalities and corporate personalities, I think sport in Sri Lanka is heading in the right direction, and we will have a very good legislative framework in the coming months.
Thanks very much, Mr. Marapana, for letting us know what's in store and the people who will be implementing that. These are National Sports Council. It created quite a buzz when the National Sports Council was announced, headed up by former Sri Lanka cricket captain Mahendra Jayawardene, and some very heavy-hitting personalities on that as well. Very pleasantly surprised to see some real vibrant women on that as well, Ms. Rowena Samarasinghe and Ms. Kasturi Tellaraja. In addition to yourself, Ms. Thiumi Amesinghe, who is the Secretary of the National Sports Council, tell us how exciting that appointment was. How was it at the inaugural meetings of the National Sports Council? A lot of people have been asking me, what is the National Sports Council? What do they do? What is their mandate? And for the moment, I've been saying it can be a fantastic organization if they choose to be so. Otherwise, it can be a benign organization. There's a lot that can happen in the middle. So as this new National Sports Council, and it's a secretary to the National Sports Council, Ms. Amesinghe, what plans do you have going forward with the aid of this legislative support that Mr. Marapana was talking about?
Shanika, as you said, there is a lot of expectation on the council. Everyone's been talking about it for the last 5 weeks, and especially because of the appointment and because of who's in it. We've had sports councils all throughout, but then this council seems to be different because we have some people from the corporate sector as well as some stars from the sporting sector. And again, we have, it's a good team. It's like a dream team, I would call it. It's just that if I say, like, initially what we were discussing was to, how to actually achieve what we want to achieve in sports. So our sports in Sri Lanka should be actually aligned with the sporting bodies as well as the NOC and the IOC, and they should also be in line with the international sporting bodies in order to achieve what we want as a country. And one of the main things that we couldn't figure out is, what do we actually want as a country? Is it an Olympic medal? Is it an Asian Games medal, or what it is? And Mr. Kirti Nanda mentioned that we actually do have a policy, a very lengthy one, which covers most of the things, most of the important aspects. So as a council, we actually we had to pick and choose what we actually thought was important. And initially, obviously, we came up with the competitive sports. We have to figure out what we need to achieve in competitive sports. We have to be realistic with what we need to achieve. We can't suddenly say, okay, we need an Olympic medal next year. And, we have to be realistic with what we want. So competitive, we've introduced a system, or we're formulating a system to actually get sportsmen from around the country into competitive sports, as well as leisure sports. That's also in our policy. There are new things like surfing, kite surfing and things like that, where it's new to Sri Lanka, but it's very popular among the coastal areas. So we'll be also looking into leisure sports as our second pillar. And then third, as Mr. Kirtananda mentioned earlier, is esports. Again, with the COVID situation, we can't really go out and participate in a lot of sports, and esports could be an important avenue in the coming years, especially because people are supposed to be indoors. And this is an area that it's $1 billion industry, and we actually have few companies in Sri Lanka who are actually gaming developers as well as players. So that's our third pillar that we're working on. And then again, the sports economy and sports tourism. As a country, with all the sports that we have, we don't think that we have actually used all our resources to actually tap into, a sports economy. Even in Malaysia, the sports economy is about $10 billion. So if you actually think about it, we have the apparel industry who is focusing on, sports related apparel. It could also be other manufacturing of goods. So we need to tap into these, and that's our fourth pillar that we're looking at. So we had to pick and choose what we actually want to work on. And then again, the council is, we have some subcommittees in the council. The first one, of course, working on a new act, because currently the National Sports Council is only supposed to advise the minister. So, I mean, we could advise the minister in various aspects, but does that mean that, we could actually get more involved? Probably not. With the current situation, it doesn't really allow us to be involved. But we need to understand that we're working with a governmental organization, and we shouldn't just come in as an external party. So we're working, our second team is working in introducing a new governance structure to work with the existing structure in the ministry, but by incorporating it to make it work like a corporate, so that, it's not a typical government organization. Then we also have an implementation team, which is working on mostly like data collection, which is not active at the moment. We need to introduce data collection, because if a athlete either in Jaffna or even in Matara, when they're about 13 or 14 years old, they need to know how to benchmark themselves, and we do not have the data. We only have maybe the national records, but other than that, at a district level, how do they need to perform? How do they need to benchmark? And that's a very vast activity, and we're working with different groups to introduce a data center. And at the end of the day, the council, there's so much that the council can do. We have the ministry, as Mr. Keithananda explained, we have 71 sporting federations and associations. So we have to work with everyone. We have to work with all the sportsmen and sportswomen. And also the corporates. We can't always, be taking money out of the government. We have to try and work in a situation where sportsmen can also contribute into the system. Because in US, the sporting economy is about 422 billion. So which means that it's, the government doesn't really have to pump in money all the time. And that's what's happening currently. So, I mean, again, there are few sportsmen in Sri Lanka who are doing well, but most sportsmen after a certain age or after a certain there's a limitation, and then they have to either stop their sport or they have to find a job and look for other avenues. But we haven't really looked into using sport into, there are so many job opportunities even in sport. So those are things that we can look into. It's not just okay, you do your O levels, A levels, and then you suddenly have to stop your sport. So that's another thing that we are looking into. But we can't do this alone. The council can't do it alone. The minister can't definitely do it alone. So it has to be a collective measure from everyone involved in sport. And mainly, there has to be accountability at the end. And we have to have results. So we have to have a result-oriented system with accountability in order to achieve it. And that's what we are trying to introduce. And the past 5 weeks have been very hectic, meetings almost every week, every other day. And we've been meeting with a lot of people. We've met with the Justice Ministry, and we've met with other lawyers as well to try and see what we could do to use a new act in order to achieve what we want.
Great, fantastic. And judging by some of the personalities on that new National Sports Council, they're not going to take no for an answer.
Yes.
What Maharajawardena in the Mumbai Indians dressing room, he's not going to be happy just to sit around in an advisory capacity. And I'm sure he's going to push for as much teeth as the National Sports Council can possibly get. So congratulations on your appointment, Ms. Abesinghe, and we hope that the council is going to deliver, even if it delivers half of what we expect of it. I think that will be a big step in the right direction. Thank you very much to the panelists for your initial thoughts on the sports law, the amendments, and all that we have covered so far. I think we've covered a fair bit in the last 55 minutes or so. But I'd like to get involved in a little bit of a discussion because I've noticed a bit of divergence in terms of regulation as well as autonomy of the sporting bodies. So that's something that I think we really need to delve into a little bit, because that's what creates the uproar in the public circles as well. Is this public money that's being used? As we talked about earlier, in 2018, I don't have the most recent figures, but in 2018, the budget allocated 7 billion rupees to the sports ministry, which means if you just take it up into an approximation, 71 sports, 7 billion rupees, 100 million rupees a sport, if we want to look at it in that view. So that's not a small amount of money. So public funds are being used. And as Mr. Maravana was saying, there's a really importance for us to tie up with big corporate players, not just in Sri Lanka, but internationally as well, and make sure they put their sponsorship funds in to Sri Lankan sports associations, without which we can't proceed to the next level. So then there comes a bit of a tug of war, as it were, between who regulates the money, who spends this money, who gives this money. All of that comes into the picture. So as the additional Solicitor General, I'm sure Mr. Dharmavardhana will be quite familiar with this kind of tug of war. So Mr. Dharmavardhana, if I can come back to you and ask you, what is your experience in this regulation and deregulation? Mr. Maravana seems to be asking for a little bit more of a liberal approach. We'll come to him later, but from your point of view, what do you think of liberalizing the sports marketing arena, as it were?
Is this question to me?
Yes, Mr. Dharma.
Fine. Thank you, Shanaka. In fact, with regard to the allocation of funds by the Ministry of Sports, how it happens is the Parliament allocates the funds to each ministry's vote, and then thereafter the Ministry of Sports allocates it to national sports associations. Now, fundamental thing which all people who are involved in the sports administration needs to keep it in mind is that all the money allocated by the Parliament is subject to the audit by the Auditor General. However, it passes the threshold of the public sector and it moves to National Sports Association, which consists of volunteer people, and they come and do a volunteer job. But unfortunately, as Mr. Marapana pointed out, these national sports associations are governed by the sports law, which was enacted in 70s when there was not much of private sector, public sector partnerships involved in sponsoring activities. In most of the national sports associations, even though the private sector sponsorships are given, the majority funds are from the Ministry of Sports. A huge sum of 8 billion or 7 billion is allocated every year. In order to control the misuse, in the 2016 regulations, we have brought in certain provisions where it is mandatory for them to obtain an audit report from an audit company under the supervision of the Auditor General. This matter, some other national sports bodies even raised with the international federations. In 2013, when I was part of the delegation which met the International Olympic Committee, they raised that the Ministry of Sports is using the Auditor General to control the national sports associations. At that time, we had to explain that this is a requirement in terms of the Sri Lankan law, which you need to get a proper audit statement. Having said that, I am of the view that the national sports bodies, they being volunteer association, should adopt a transparent and accountable process. Some of the associations which had failed to do that had created these issues. Even in the private sector, in the corporate sector, maintaining accountability and the transparent process is a necessity. Therefore, I don't think this is something new, but when we are drafting the new sports law, we will have to ensure that a proper administration, especially with regard to the financial management, has to be brought in order to curb this menace. Number of sports bodies, even as of today, under the investigation by the sports ministry for number of corruption issues. As pointed out by Naveen, nobody has gone and complained to the police, as far as I can remember, but there is one instance, a pending matter, which I don't want to name the National Sports Association. They have gone and complained to the police with regard to the malpractices which had taken place, and the investigations are pending. Therefore, I think we need to strengthen the regulatory mechanism, because in the next 1 or 2 decades, the government will be pumping millions of rupees into these national bodies. Therefore, the public has a right to know how did you spend the public money, whether the procurement guidelines were followed. Leave aside the government procurement guidelines, which they will call is full of red tape, but at least minimum of 3 quotations been called, or the suppliers have been registered. These procedures has to be brought in. Ms. Abhay Singh is from the corporate sector. I'm sure in all of these corporate sector, the blue chip companies, they follow the same procedure, which we need to inculcate among the people who are the volunteers to follow at least the accepted norms in the private sector. Leave aside the government sector. Even they don't do that. So therefore, opportunity has been created for some people to make money, where the public sector, they will be under the procurement guidelines, but here they don't follow it. So this issue, we need to tackle it. If not, I don't think that we can develop the sports, because even though I have been talking about prevention of corruption in sports, but we have to prevent the corruption in sports administration as well. So Shanaka, over to you, and I'll be happy to address any other issues after other eminent panelists address those issues.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dharmavardhana. Mr. Marappan, if I can come to you with a similar flip side to that question. Naturally, the official bar is going to be pro-regulation. So I'm seeing a little bit of that coming out here as well. The private bar being pro-liberalism as well. But he raises a very interesting question. If we are having as much money being pumped into sports of public money, the government is pumping this in to the sports ministry. And as you say, there needs to be supplementation from corporate entities as well. But Mr. Dharmavardhana raises a very interesting point. What about accountability and transparency? Is the government allowed to regulate only the amount of funds that it put into the sports association? Should there be a dichotomy of sources where the sports association gets to do what it wants with its corporate sponsorship? And is the government allowed to only regulate what it has put in? So how do you try to get through this quagmire of issues?
Shanaka, firstly, I don't think there is any divergence of opinion. A sporting association has to account for, to the highest possible accounting standards, of every rupee or cent they spend. And I am of the firm view that the government, the Ministry of Sports, should be able to look into both sources of funds, whether it be public funds or whether it be private funds, because the association gets the opportunity to earn this money because it is a national association. I mean, if Sri Lanka cricket wasn't in charge of the national team of Sri Lanka, nobody's going to pay them a cent. So they are entitled to get sponsors, they are entitled to get private sector funds, because the government of Sri Lanka has given them the status of a national association. So the office bearers of all the bodies have to account for every rupee or cent they spend, because it is our money and our sports and our sporting future. So there is no divergence of views. But the issue is the sanctions given for mismanagement cannot be politicized. So if you are sanctioning a body for mismanaging funds, the individual should be punished, but they can't be replaced by ministry appointed officials. This is what happens, because as Mr. Dharmavadan said, these are volunteers. These are people in national association, don't do it for money. They do it because they are passionate about their sport, for example, rugby or be it kabaddi or table tennis or whatever. So no one wants to come into something like that and then be accused of financial mismanagement, removed forcibly using the provisions of the sports law, kept on ice for a few years. Then after a few years, everything is forgotten, nothing is done, and they have been told, okay, fine, you can go back and run your association again. Now that is where the divergence of opinion is. And that is why I am of the firm view that if you sanction somebody, at least continue it to the end. Have an inquiry, find him guilty or not guilty, and have closure. Then tell him or her, you can't be elected again. You have played out funds, you can't be elected again. Fair enough. There's no one has a grouse with that. But don't keep people in limbo. Don't remove office bearers who have been elected democratically. Fill them in with ministry people for a few years. Then without concluding the original inquiry, pretend as if it never happened and call for fresh elections. Now that is what has been happening over and over and over again. So in the new regime, you have to have a sanctioning methodology and accounting standards, but the filling of a gap left by a sanctioned office bearer has to be done democratically by the association itself. So for example, if the president is found guilty of something, you remove him, tell the association, elect yourself a new president. I think that way all the objectives are achieved, but in a more democratic manner.
So you're saying the autonomy to actually punish people should also be with the National Sports Association. So if they find that one of the elected officials has been corrupt, they can move him out and then appoint another person from within their ranks.
No, I don't stand that. No, that should be with the ministry, because if you see sports bodies, sometimes people have a very iron grip on the domestic association. So they have a huge power base and their association will never remove that person. The ministry should have the power to sanction somebody and say, you're not fit to be a president or a secretary of association. We are banning you from continuing or coming up for election for 5 years or 10 years, or even a lifetime ban. Even all the world bodies do that. But once a person is removed, the replacement has to come from within the constitutional structure of the association. That is the only point I wish to make.
Okay, thanks for that, Mr. Marapana. Mr. Keerthinanda, I'm going to come to you with something that flows on from what Mr. Marapana said. He said that some sports bodies, just by their very nature, have very strong individuals who might have a tight grip, a vice-like grip on their constituents, which are the member clubs or the member individuals. So as a result of that, sometimes you find, like even in the world stage, you had Sepp Blatter of FIFA, you have the International Olympic Committee, you have very strong individuals like that, against whom nobody is going to say or do anything. So as a result, the ministry needs to have that supervisory jurisdiction over the National Sports Association.
Yes.
But in that context, what about dispute resolution? What is the national sports policy? How would it ideally go about dispute resolution? If I can just bring one incident to life, there was in the mid-2000s, there was a rugby tournament in Thailand that Sri Lanka had picked its team for. And there was a dispute with regard to who the captain should be. One player thought he should be the captain, another player thought he should be the captain, and the team split into two factions as well. Some of them refused to tour if X was captain, the others refused to tour if Y was captain. So as a result of that, I think Mr. Gamini Lokube was the Honorable Minister of Sports at the time, and the matter went to him. And given the expediency of the situation, the team was supposed to fly out maybe tomorrow night or the night after that. And he had to come up with a solution. And with the wisdom of Solomon, I think he just said, well, you captain one game, you captain the other game. It was an inelegant solution, but I think Mr. Lokube did the only thing that was available to him at the time, and he came up with a compromise. But in situations like that, where time is of the essence, Mr. Keerthinanda, we've had situations, and that's just one high-profile incident, but we've had, whether it be under 13 synchronized swimming, whether it be tennis. I'm sure Ms. Abhay Singh is well versed with the travails of the tennis arena in this particular aspect as well. How do you think that we can best address that kind of situation?
Actually, Shanaka, I would like to mention two things. One is Naveen, my good friend Naveen Marapana said that we need to have all the sports bodies audited, either by the government auditor or a reputed audit firm in the country. There are so much of problems coming because there are over 71 sports bodies in the country. As we all know, all the government uh, corporations, government institution, everything is audited by the government auditor. So therefore, sports board, when you submit the annual finances to the auditor general, it takes a longer time. So there are certain practical issues. So therefore, we have brought this regulation recently. Until the government audit is audited, they could give it to a reputed audit firm and do the auditing and go for the annual general meeting. Otherwise, that get postponed. These are the problems. These are the practical problems all the sports bodies are finding at the moment. Therefore, now, as you know, according to the present law of the country, sports law of the country, section section 21, subsection 3 of the sports law clearly says the Auditor General shall audit all accounts of such committees and each and every association, including the Olympic Committee. All the sports bodies has to be audited by the government auditor. That is the law of the country at the moment. Other thing is, now as Mr. Naveen Marapana clearly mentioned, there are pros and cons. We have to change this law because this has been there for over 50 odd years. So what I want to say is, if they are going to change the law, they have to carefully handle this, because all these funds, now for example, even for cricket, football or rugby, these funds come for the government of Sri Lanka sports, not under the flag, Sri Lankan flag. This is not for you and me. This is for the sportsmen and sportswomen in the country, cricketers or rugby rights or whatever. So it is not a private fund. It is not an NGO. This is a national sports body. So therefore, check and balances has to be there, either from the government auditor general's side or reputed audit company. If you don't do the auditing, and also you must bring, clearly I think we all agree, we must bring the criminal liability to sports. If anyone violates these things, should be punished in the court of law. We have to have strict laws, and also I think it is a high time for us to bring the independent sports tribunals. We need to have the independent sports tribunals as in entire world. Most of the countries are going to from the minister's powers are taken off and given that powers to independent sports tribunals. Even in our sports policy in 2012, we have specifically mentioned an independent tribunal and a arbitration board will be set up to inquire into all disputes relating to sports. So this is that. Even in 2012, we discussed this matter. We implemented this. So I would say the Honorable Minister, the present Minister of Sports, would like, I mean, he could go through with this areas, especially the sports policy, national sports policy with their National Sports Council, and go through one by one and see what are the important areas that they could take it from this. We need to implement. In 2019, last month, we drafted the amendments to the sports law, and it was approved by the Attorney General. It was approved by the legal draftment department. So unfortunately, we couldn't implement, put it to the parliament because the government changed. So I would say that there's this final draft to the present laws has been done, but we did the first cabinet approval, but thereafter we had to submit to the parliament, first reading, second reading. We couldn't do it because the government regime changed. So I would say that the draft is there at the ministry. Go through that. Go through the sports policy. Take the international sports policies and the regulations, as well as the ethics, sports ethics, and draft a proper new sports law, because the old law is over 50 years old. Even if you use a vehicle for 50 years, it should be give it to retirement, right? So now the new sports body ideas have come forward. International sports policies have come forward. Now the theories, everything has to be free and fair, and also independent, and also they should have the sports bodies should have the freedom to take their own decisions, no interference, political interference. So take all these areas, looking into these, all the policies that we could think of, and amend these laws or implement a new legislation in order to overcome all these problems. That's my opinion.
Thank you, Mr. Kirthinanda. Ms. Abesinghe, if I can come to you with a follow-up to that question as well. I mean, you can't have played tennis for as long as you have without coming across situations like this, where you have political interference with regards to, not political from the ministry level, but political interference at the association level with national selectors, all that kind of stuff with disputes. And I heard the Honorable Minister, Mr. Nama Rajapaksa, recently as well, saying that all the times that we have succeeded at an international level, it has almost been despite the system rather than because of the system. He gave us some examples of where even without facilities, Sri Lanka have punched above their weight, as it were. So from a sports person's point of view, you mentioned earlier that several promising sportsmen give up, they have to find a job, but some of them actually also give up because they're frustrated with the system, because they don't get selected when they were a deserving candidate, something like that. So does the National Sports Council have a theory or a plan to combat things like that, keep people in sports and make sure fairness and transparency are part of selection processes?
Yes, Shanika. So as you said, like personally, even I have gone through such a lot of hardship. Like even as a kid, it's actually, when you think about it, it's, when you're 10 years or 11 years old, the things that you go through because of sport, I mean, they say that it makes you stronger, but at the same time, it's actually traumatizing. You make kids go through things, even if it's a simple, trial for a national team, they wait till the last minute, and then, suddenly someone comes and influences and gets someone else in a team. So even at a very young age, I personally have gone through it, and, throughout the years, I guess we get used to it. And I think it's not okay, but then people think that, okay, this is the system and this is what's been happening. And even personally, I feel like even I would have continued playing tennis for longer if I was not really frustrated with the system. And that's one of the reasons why we want to, change things. But as Mr. Marapana said, it's very difficult. When you take the different sporting associations and federations into consideration, and then you have the NOC, then you have the IOC, then you have the ministry, the minister, the sports council. It's a lot of bodies, and you have to find that balance. You can't, and again, there's always been issues, with associations and the NOC, or the ministry and the NOC. So I think we've all, more than playing the sport, I think sportsmen actually go through another battle, to succeed. It's not just, excelling in your sport, but you have to keep on, fighting with people, or your parents have to keep on, pushing. And then if you don't have any clout, then some people end up stopping at a very young age. And so what we are trying to do is finding that balance. And again, it's not an easy task. And we've actually had a few discussions with Mr. Marapana as well. And we're trying to introduce systems. We had a meeting with the Justice Ministry, and Mr. Dharmawadana was also present, where, to incorporate sports arbitration into the act itself. Things like that, so that sportsmen don't really have to, fight with each other for unnecessary things. That energy could be channeled into the sports itself without, spending days at the ministry. I think that even I heard even at the ministry there are inquiries going on and parents are shouting, and it's not required, right? There's something pure. You can achieve something by actually channeling that into the sport itself, and that is what we're trying to do. We're trying to get in all these aspects together to work together, which is an extremely tough thing to do. But I think if we all have to give and take. The ministry can't say that, okay, I want everything my way, or the NOC might not be able to say, okay, this is, because then we can't find that balance. So we're hoping that we can give and take things and make sure that we come into a solution that ultimately the sportsmen and sportswomen actually benefit, and that they are not mentally traumatized by getting involved in sport.
Absolutely, Ms. Abhisingha, thank you for that. And that's you explained exactly the opposite of sports, the way that we're going about some of the stuff. It's very antithetical to the sporting values that we're trying to teach kids. And I think that's percolating into society as well, where we see similar things, not just on the sports field, but in corporate boardrooms or wherever else. We do see this kind of behavior emerging. And if we can have sports values instilled at a younger age and the sports regulation being strict enough to make sure that these people learn sports in the proper way, then I think that will have a residual effect on the rest of society as well. But it raised another very important point. If I can come to Mr. Dharmawardana with that as well, from the regulation point of view. We've got the sports body, we've got the National Sports Association, say we've got the Football Federation, for instance. And then you've got the global body, which is FIFA, just by way of example. And then, of course, you've got the National Olympic Committee, because football is now an Olympic sport. You've got the NOC as well. So there are all, and then you've got the Ministry of Sports in addition to that. So that's 4 real key players in that whole thing, with the addition of perhaps a corporate sponsor also. So how do we go about managing all these different personalities which are involved in just the one sport, Mr. Dharmawardana? Is there an expeditious method, a streamlined method of managing all these personalities?
Shanaka, when it comes to the international federations and especially the International Olympic Committee, the International Olympic Committee, the affairs are governed by the IOC Charter. And the National Olympic Committee has to follow the guidelines set out in the International Olympic Committee Charter. The IOC Charter has, even with regard to the issues what we discuss in this forum, pertaining to the transparent, accountable administration and the auditing of accounts. And as Mr. Marapana mentioned, that we need to ensure that they account even up to the last cent. The International Olympic Charter provides for that. Unfortunately, what has happened is, I see 2 issues. One is the Ministry of Sports consists of officials who are from the public sector, and their knowledge with regard to the sports administration is not up to the not up to the expected mark. Unfortunately, they have not been given proper training about sports administration, and some have gained experience over the time. In addition to that, in order to balance this whole thing, the volunteers also not been given a proper understanding and training how to manage their affairs. Since we are coming into the tail end of this discussion and having listened to the eminent speakers, Mr. Kirtinanda and Mr. Navin Marapana and Ms. Abhisingha, I think one way out of this problem is we will have to, in the new Sports Act, we will have to bring in a mechanism to have a permanent sports arbitration tribunal to resolve the disputes and then to send it for the minister's final decision. Why I emphasize that the final decision has to be given by the minister. When the 13th Amendment to the Constitution was brought in, the management of the national sports associations were vested with the ministry. I trust the framers of the 13th Amendment considered the issue of Sri Lanka's national teams they represented the country, they represent Sri Lanka. Therefore, that has to be approved by the minister. But having said that, I don't think any minister should be burdened with the issues in the sports associations or the selection process. Therefore, I think one way to bring in a balance of these issues with regard to the selection is to bring in a permanent sports arbitration panel, which will be appointed by the minister for a period of 2 years or 3 years. The second thing what we need to consider is we need to have the volunteers to manage the national sports associations, and we need to give them either a handbook of what they should do and what they should not do at the beginning of their time period. And periodically, the sports ministry will have to train them with regard to the sports regulations and the sports law. Most of the problems are cropped up because they fail to follow the guidelines and the procedures. The third item, what I gathered from today's discussion, is what Mr. Marapana emphasized, that is to take action against corrupt persons. What has happened is they are elected by a number of clubs or associations. Since I was involved in almost all the sports related cases in Sri Lanka for last 7 to 8 years, what I have observed is that where Mr. Marapan and myself, we were involved in one protracted battle. I call them paper clubs. They set up paper clubs by some of the officials who has authority in order to continue in office. Even in terms of the International Olympic Charter, a person can hold that particular office is limited for a 2-year period or a 4-year period. After that, he can't hold it for another 4-year period. You should permit somebody else to come in and discharge their duties. Instead of that, there are people who cling on to these appointments for over 10 to 20 years. And then that becomes an issue. They don't permit the younger generation to come up and manage the affairs of these volunteer bodies. So the new law, we will have to ensure to limit the number of clubs or the district association for each association. And we have to eliminate the paper clubs. The paper clubs have paved the way for number of issues and especially for malpractices. This is my thinking, and what I stated last is purely my personal ideas. I do not represent, it doesn't represent the official version, even though I'm from the state, but those are my personal views.
Thank you very much.
Excuse me, Mr. Dharmawardana, just one point that I want to explain. Arbitration should be independent arbitration. If the minister appoints the arbitration, then again it's politically connected. The arbitrator should be independently appointed by a mechanism. That is where everywhere in the world is. So the minister should have the powers to control and develop the sport, and also he is responsible to the parliament as well as for the government as the Minister of Sports. But independent of the sports arbitration has to be there. That is what the Olympic Charter says. That is what the ICC, International Cricket Council, says. That is what the FIFA says. Mr. Dharmawardana and myself, we all represented Sri Lanka in Lausanne, even in the Olympic International Olympic Council in 2013, and again in 2018 I represented. All what they say is arbitration, sports arbitration has to be independent. If the minister appoints, the line minister appoints the arbitrators, then it is not independent. That's my personal opinion.
Thank you for that. Closing remark, Mr. Marapana, very quickly. We've run out of time.
Anaka, what we have to bear in mind is we'll never have smooth administration of sports, because sportsmen by nature are highly competitive, have elephantine egos, and have a culture of competing with each other. And when they go into administration, it's those very same people. They may be old in the tooth, but the competitiveness and the egos have not changed. So it's going to be a rocky ride. It's going to be a roller coaster ride. But I think with the new amendments and with all these ideas coming in, Sri Lankan sport has a bright future, and the sports law has a bright future. That is my opinion.
Yes, certainly. And I think you raise a very important point, even as we end this panel discussion, the fact that many constitutions of national sports associations say that you have to have played the game at a national level to hold any office. So if we want to professionalize sports administration, do things like that need to change? And would that be kind of a stepping on the feet of the democratic rights of those associations as well? But I think we do really desperately need to professionalize administration to keep up with the professionalization of sports. Mr. Sumati Dharmawardana, Additional Solicitor General, President's Council, Mr. Navin Marapana, President's Council, Mr. Panduka Kirtinanda, and Ms. Yumi Abesinger, thank you very much for what has been a very enlightening discussion. I'm sure that everybody listening in has learned a lot, and it's good to know that the regulations are there, the statutes are there, and all we have to do is now build on this journey. So many congratulations to Yumi and the National Sports Council, the new one, to go forward with whatever teeth the acts have given you. And once again, thank you very much to all our panelists. Hopefully we'll be seeing at least an Asian Games medal on the way in the not too distant future. So thanks very much once again. Have a great evening, and please share this Zoom discussion with everyone that you may know who might be interested in it once it's published by the Bar Association. Thanks again to the Bar Association for inviting us, and it's been a fabulous discussion. Thank you very much. Good evening.